But tonight, we are going to continue what we started last month in this monthly series, which I am so excited about. I feel like that every month, this is becoming a premier destination point for thinking and spiritual Black Christian and conservative leaders. And we are blessed every month to have some fantastic leaders from around the country that are addressing some of the issues. Many of you know here at DLI and FDF, our tagline is righteousness, justice, liberty, and virtue. And we seek to answer some of the issues of our day humbly through what we consider sometimes a biblical worldview. And so tonight we're going to continue the discussion that we began a month ago with two fantastic leaders, men that I have gotten to know over the last, over the last, Dr. Bradley corrected me and tried to up it to 20 years. I don't know if it's been quite that long, but I have known him over a decade. And Bishop Garland Hunt, who has been a good friend, really probably for over 30 years now. So what I want to do is to read a little bit of their bio just to set the stage. We have some people that may not have been with us last month. And then afterwards, I will just begin to do a little recap and then delve into our subject matter as we continue. So Bishop Garland Hunt is an Atlanta native and is a proven strategic leader with dynamic ministry background and extensive experience in leadership management and pastoral care. After completing his bachelor's degree from Howard University in 1980 and his JD from Howard University Law School in 1983, he served as a judicial law clerk and staff attorney with the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. In 1993, he founded Raleigh International Church, an influential ministry with the mission of reconciliation in Raleigh, North Carolina. As a senior pastor, Garland grew the church from ground up to the time of his departure in 2000. The church was thriving and was well over 500 active members attending weekly. Bishop Hunt moved from Raleigh, North Carolina, back to his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, to serve as the executive pastor of the Father's House. His executive leadership spanned some 28 years with the Fellowship of International Churches, Wellington Boone Ministries, New Generation Campus Ministries, and Prison Fellowship. He has served in many state and national leadership roles. In 2004, he was appointed to the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Parole by Governor Sonny Perdue and served as chairman of the Pardons and Parole Board in 2006. In 2010, he was the commissioner of the Georgia Department of Juvenile Justice, and in 2011 served as the president of Prison Fellowship. In March 2015, Bishop Wellington Boone installed Bishop Garland Hunt as senior pastor of the Father's House. Each week, Bishop Hunt demonstrates his pastor's heart through his passionate preaching and vibrant leadership. Additionally, we have Dr. Anthony Bradley, who is a professor of religious studies and the director of the Center of Study of Human Flourishing at the King's College. Dr. Bradley is also a research fellow at the Acton Institute. Dr. Bradley lectures at colleges and universities, business organizations, conferences, and churches throughout the United States and abroad. His writings on religious and cultural issues have been published in a variety of journals, including the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Washington Examiner, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Detroit News, Christianity Today, and World Magazine. Dr. Bradley is called upon by members of the broadcast media for comment on current issues and has appeared on C-SPAN, NPR, CNN, Headline News, and Fox News, among others. He studies and writes on issues of race in America, mass incarceration and overcriminalization, youth and family welfare, education, and ethics. To all, please welcome our two esteemed guests tonight. So last month, we kind of got a little bit of background from these two men, and I will allow them to integrate a little bit of that as they lead us in this discussion tonight. One of the key things I think that struck me last month from Dr. Bradley in particular was this idea of mass incarceration has probably more to do with issues of poverty than issues of race. And he, I think, outlined very eloquently his thesis that was much different than Michelle Alexander, which is a book that he and Bishop Hunt referenced a little bit last week. We also talked a little bit about the understanding of overcriminalization, and we'll allow him to touch on that a little bit more tonight. Bishop Hunt also went and talked a little bit about just kind of understanding how big this mass incarceration issue is in our country, particularly when you compare America to other countries. And part of what he has done in a variety of roles that he's been in to address this. And so I want to pick up from there with Bishop Garland Hunt tonight. Bishop, we talked a little bit about your role as head of pardons and parole in Georgia. Can you tell us generally what the Pardons and Parole Board is? And I know that it varies a little bit from state to state, and what your role was while you were there serving in that capacity under Governor Sonny Perdue at the time.
Well, thank you so much, Bishop Dean, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone again. Yeah, this is a burden for me, actually, because not just being in law, but recognizing that many individuals in prison are just like us. I mean, I remember some of my first times going as a parole board member into the prison and just looking at their faces. And they aren't all, these Christian, these inmates that just want to kill you, but they look like people that made some mistakes. So first I realized that very quickly, when we start having parole board hearings, we would go to the prisons, we would determine whether or not they had revoked their parole, maybe make some technical charges, or it could be some other additional crimes. So as a parole board member, we looked at every prisoner that was eligible for parole and determined based on a grid that served us to make sure that we made a fair assessment of who could come out on parole. And of course, in that process, they had to spend a certain percentage of their time that was given by their sentencing before we could even consider it. Some cases, of course, some of the crimes where they were found guilty of, they were not even considered for parole. But when they were, we had to consider every one of those cases. And in that case, we took into account the crime that was committed, whether it was with an armed crime, whether it was robbery, was it kidnapping, was it some kind of assault on another person, was it egregious? So those kind of things we had to consider. So coming into the parole board, it quickly equipped me to understand about the whole Department of Corrections, how it worked, and how we relate to these guys that are in prison. And then also, who is staying in prison too long? I mean, that was a whole other issue I never even thought about, because I was one of those that thought that, the best thing for a criminal is to leave them in there and throw away the key until every day of the sentence was exhausted. But reality of it is that's just not true. And it sensitized me to recognize that there was some reform needed. It was important to have parole, have probation, and those kind of things, so there can be some accountability while they're still under some type of prison sentence, and they can be actually sent back if somehow they violate their parole. So that brought us into a whole another gamut, because as a minister, I also realized that the church needs to be involved. And I realized in Georgia, for instance, they only receive $25 in a bus ticket. And let me just state it to you.
Wait. So just pause right there. So you're saying that once somebody has done their time, and if the parole board says, hey, we think that this person should be done, they get $25 in a bus ticket?
Every inmate is when they come to the completion of their time, either on parole or even if they have exhausted their time of the sentence, they get $25 and a bus ticket anywhere in Georgia they want to go. And you can imagine, first of all, they have the problems of where they're going to get a job. Many of them can't even be released if they're on parole because they have to have a permanent home. Several different things. That the importance of getting a job, having long-lasting residence is important. But again, they don't have even family to go to. Many times they're estranged from their families. So it's actually a ticket for failure, because in reality they exhaust what they have, and then they're looking for some opportunities. So for us, particularly me being a pastor at that point, what it did for me is it recognized, where's the church? The church has to get involved, and it's almost, we got to get the church at the gate when they walk out of their prison, because when they come out of the prison, they need some type of hope for their transition back into the communities. Because if it's not, other their peers, the other ones that they came with, otherwise they just come better criminals. So the fact of the church involvement, so we started a faith-based component there. I won't go to all the details, but I will say there was some disappointment even for myself, because many churches, pastors, and leaders were not excited about having not only someone from prison coming into their church, but even helping them in their transition, because they were so afraid they're manipulators. They're so afraid that they'll take advantage of their things. And so what you have here is, again, that the recycling of over 60 to 70% of those in 3 years go right back into prison. And if we don't catch them, and particularly in this case, I'm talking about the church, then what happens is the world would catch them, and they'll go back into that cycle. That was so very vivid for me with those that are on parole.
So I want to take a step back for a minute, Bishop. I remember you once referring to the Pardons and Parole Board as a mercy board. Talk a little bit about what you mean by that, and what is the role? We clearly understand kind of a biblical understanding from Romans what the role of government is to essentially protect those who are innocent and to punish criminals. When we do that, though, there's plenty of scriptures that we could look at that talk about the need to visit those in prison, the idea of justice, the idea of compassion. Help us to understand a little bit of the balance, because, I grew up kind of in a home where it was kind of understood that, it was kind of old school, you didn't do wrong. And if you did wrong, then you should be subject to the punishment and take it, like a man, and so help our listeners and people that are on this call understand kind of this balance between the biblical role of government to protect and the idea, though, of justice and also mercy, which was the role, as you sometimes described, the parole board.
That's very good question. Let me just say, first of all, I agree with you. My perspective was the same thing. When the governor offered the position to me to go on the parole board, I'm thinking that, well, why even think about parole? Because number one, the tendency is to think that everybody in prison deserves to be there. Number two, why would you let them out early? Because that's just an opportunity for them to misbehave, maybe to come out and do other crimes. And then why should we even take the responsibility of bringing somebody out? But let me start on this side first. One of the first lessons I had to learn that I really would like to communicate to everybody listening. Now, parole, by the way, began to lose popularity as time went on, because they did not understand the value of it. But parole is still different than probation. Probation is something that you're sentenced by the judge. The judge says that you will serve, let's say, 5 years. Then you also will have maybe another 2 years or 3 years on probation. So it was a part of the sentencing. So if you violated, you would go back to the judge, and the judge would determine whether or not there's a violation of parole. On probation. But at the parole board, particularly in Georgia, our responsibility was, we would look at the crime, and we determined if you had 5 years, we would take, well, let's see, he served 3 faithfully. He has no disciplinary problems. The conduct has been good. So we're going to let him come out in 3 years, but for 2 years, he's under our authority. What that means is there's some level of accountability. So our position on that mercy was to give them a chance to transition back into society with accountability. The difference, a person that comes and fulfills his sentence, he comes out and no one knows where he lives. There's no requirement that he has no idea where he's going to go. He can do whatever he go. But with parole, at least you have parole officers that follow you to work. They may come to your house. They may come unannounced to see if you're doing what you should be. Are you getting involved and doing other things that you shouldn't do? So parole helps to give you that space of time where you can prove yourself in that process, as well as other things like transitional housing, all these kind of things. So what I'm saying is the mercy is with accountability. And if you look at a biblical standard, actually, that's what mercy is also. There's still accountability with mercy. We still have to answer to God no matter what. So he is a God of mercy, and we always want to stay on that side. But I think it is very important in our system, particularly rehabilitation, that there is some level of the distinguishing between those that possibly have been rehabilitated while they're there or possibly could do better. Because sometimes the sentencing is just too extreme. There are times that people have a sentencing based on a judgment, a jury, it may be. So it gives us a second chance to look at what's a better time that they should serve, and then how level of accountability they will have once they get out. So that's the type of mercy that I didn't realize is so necessary. I would rather stay next door. I end with this. I'd rather live next door to a person that came out on parole and did 3 years of parole and had 2 years on probation, on parole, 3 years in prison, and then 2 years on parole, because I know that if he's done it with me next door, he's going to be accountable to that parole officer. There's accountability, as opposed to living next door to a person that finished their sentence. They did all 5 years, but no one knows where he is. There's no accountability. He doesn't have to report. He's not on probation, and there's no accountability. So that period of accountability is actually not only just mercy for him, but it's also better for his transition back into society.
Wow, that's great. I mean, just the unique experience that you have had, both being a pastor, but then also being on, an attorney, but then also being on the side where you actually see these files of the real stories that these guys have actually gone through. I want to shift to Dr. Bradley for a second. Anthony, I'm just going to say it like this. So when people say criminal justice reform, that can mean a lot of different things. And just recently, I saw a short commercial from a popular conservative icon that basically was trashing virtually any form of criminal justice reform. How do you, whether in the academy or otherwise, how do you present the need for having kind of a just society with regard to all citizens, including returning citizens, and balancing that with, I'll just say, some who almost want to demonize any effort of meaningful criminal justice reform? If you could talk to us a little bit about how you balance that, because our organization tends to be center right, but we are biblical. We want to look at these things as best as we can through the lens of Scripture. So help us out in terms of how you communicate this in an effective way without being thrown off of conservative platforms for just approaching it.
That's a great question. I think for me, I'm interested in human flourishing, and thinking about it in terms of what needs to happen in society for everybody to thrive, regardless of race, class, regardless of your past, your present, your future. And what do we need to do to put people in position to thrive and succeed? Those who've made mistakes, those who've made a lot of mistakes, because everybody's made mistakes, right? I mean, I think people don't understand that you are only one prosecutor away from being thrown in jail. There are 4,500 criminal laws that you could be arrested for. And if you think that you are not a criminal, I'll just give you two examples in the federal code to let you know that you probably committed at least 3 crimes today. Federal crime 16 USG 707-5 CFR makes it a federal crime for judges in the federal duck stamp contest to not spend at least 2 hours reviewing the artwork submitted by duck stamp contestants before the contest begins. That's a federal crime. It is also a federal crime to walk your pet dog in a national park using a leash longer than 6 feet. That's a federal crime. So a prosecutor could be with you walking your dog and your leash is 7 feet. You're going to jail, right? So we have this explosion of criminal laws. I mean, in some states, it's illegal to use certain ingredients in certain food preparations, right? And so if we have too many laws, prosecutors have every incentive to use those laws to further their career. And they do that on the backs of poor people, right? So this idea that we don't need a reform, to me, is a denial that sin exists. If you think that we don't need criminal justice reform, what you're denying is that the effects of sin are not embedded in the characters and actors in the criminal justice system. So as I see it, prosecutors sin, state representatives sin, senators sin, judges sin, everybody's a sinner. And so because sin has been introduced into the system, I would actually say, and I could argue this biblically, right? That to say that we don't need reform is actually unbiblical. Why is that? Because there's not a single system. There's not a single system in America, in the world, that does not have sinners. And every system belongs to Jesus Christ. The criminal justice system belongs to Christ. And so until that system does exactly what Christ Jesus would do in that system, it needs reform.
Yeah.
So if someone says that we don't need criminal justice reform, I already know they aren't thinking like a Christian thinks. Right? That is categorical paganism. Because paganism is partly concerned with sort of short-term outcomes and things of that nature. Secondly, and I think this is something I talked about last time, we need to talk about and be serious about all of the variables and contributions to getting people in the system, through the system, and out of the system permanently. And if you look at prevention measures, what is it that keeps people from getting in the system in the first place? There's a lot of opportunity to keep folk out the system. And then once they're in the system, as Bishop was saying, there's a lot of opportunities to make sure they get out in a just manner. And then when they get out of the system, there are lots of opportunities for us to make sure they stay out of the system. And so we have to have criminal justice reform, because the prevention side, the incarceration side, and the post-incarceration side all belong to Jesus. I think we have an obligation to see that everybody thrives because they're made in the image and likeness of God, regardless of their race, color, class, if it's a federal crime, a state crime, a capital crime, a petty crime, whatever the crime is. I think we have an obligation to make sure people are, that their dignity and humanity is restored, so they can be the people that God has designed and created them to be. So Christians, I'm going to push on this. This might be a bit controversial. I'm going to say it like this. I think Christians should talk about this differently than conservatives.
great. That's great.
Right now, right now, I could talk a long time about this and probably end up right getting happy in here. But Christians should be talking about this differently than conservatives that are driven often by the wrong incentives. Conservatives are often driven by incapacitation, crime, punishment, lock the key, throw them away because they are non-humans. Christians, because of the cross and the resurrection, have to be thinking about criminal justice reform in terms of restoring people's dignity and humanity, because that's exactly what God did for us and the crimes that we commit every single day against him.
Mm.
So if we have particularly and distinct Christian categories about these issues, I think it opens up both our imaginations for being critical of the system, but also it opens up our imagination for solutions, right? It opens up our imagination for thinking about the ways the church can get involved in those three buckets: prevention, incarceration, and post-incarceration. And if we think about it in those terms, I think there are plenty of opportunities for us to do justice to what Christ would have us do with the people who were made in the image and likeness of the Father.
Wow, that's great. I could not agree with you more from the context of Christians may see this and need to see this differently from just from conservatives. I do think that that's an important distinction. You can be a Christian, you can be a conservative, but I do think that the former requires us to look at things from a maybe perhaps a different lens. But I want to stay on this for a second with you, and then I want to pivot back to Bishop Hunt. Sometimes in this process, all of this discussion, and I think sometimes, in my opinion, my assessment on the left, there is concern for the criminal and making sure that he is treated with dignity. And in some regards, there are other incentives that on the left that they might have that is not thinking about that. But sometimes it seems to me is lost on those who are the victims. When you look within our community, in urban communities where there are higher rates of crime in some of these areas, we're thinking about, the criminal justice reform system and those who might be returning, but how much thought, what should we do, the church and just individuals, in terms of thinking about the people who are victimized by those who go in?
That's an excellent question. We have this is something that James Furman Jr. Mentioned in a conference that I was attending. He basically said, "Listen, we have a violence problem in this country. Period. Sometimes violent criminals go to jail. Sometimes they don't. And because of that, we have a nation of victims." Communities of men and women and children who've been victimized by criminal activity. And so there is a need for law and order, right? There is a need to protect people from victimization because of violence, property crime, violent crime, etc. And so we do need to take the victims seriously and introduce disincentives for people to commit criminal deviance. Introducing disincentives for people to commit criminal deviance. But what's so interesting is the things that we think are going to deter crime, for example, like increasing sentencing lengths, increasing the number of laws, that's not what reduces crime. If we really want to protect, this is where the script gets flipped, right? This is where pastors can lean in on solutions and the radical change agents in the church. So check this out. if you want to eliminate crime in a low-income community, strengthen marriage.
Mm.
You don't need to increase laws. You don't need more police, because this is what the data says. And this, especially for men, a married man almost never commits a crime, a violent crime or property crime, right? Married men don't go to prison. Here's why: because they're thinking about the consequences of their behavior, because it affects other people. And they have some accountability, because homegirls are home said, where were you? What were you doing? We got these kids to feed. He has a level of accountability at home. And so he's thinking differently. Like, I can't do that. So what's interesting is that if you want to reduce violent and criminal activity, if you want to reduce criminal deviance, the scriptures are replete with the solution, which includes marriage. It is the most effective crime reduction tool we have. We don't need more police, we need more marriage. Mm-hmm. If you strengthen marriage, if you strengthen family, if you strengthen education, if you strengthen the opportunity for jobs, guess what happens? A radical reduction in crime. This is what we know for a fact. Married men are 67% less likely to go back into the system. We know for a fact that marriage reduces crime on average by 35%. So what we often think are the solutions: more laws, stricter penalties, more police presence. Those may be short-term solutions, but the long-term solutions are the things that God has instituted from the beginning that contribute to people living and thriving and being exactly the kinds of people that he wants them to be. So we need to protect victims. Absolutely, we have to do that. But the way that we do that, we may actually need to be a bit more creative and think about the ways in which love, connection, community, family, faith, and those things are actually more effective in the long run. Now, here's a fact. We've got to have police presence as I would say two things. One, as a way of representing accountability, to send that signal. And secondly, to restore confidence that people have in the legal system itself. So, not against police. I don't think we should defund them. That's really stupid. But the police, the role of the police is in a matrix of solutions. So it's police and education and marriage and family. And what a lot of people do, because they think in terms of the reductionism of politics, they want to make it about one variable. Well, if you want to reduce crime, we need more police. I'm like, okay, but you also need a lot of other things as well. And I think that creativity is where the church can really can lean in and offer those other solutions, so that we put police. Again, I'm not anti-police, but I think that if the church can work in ways that God designed the church to do, we can put some police out of business. We can put some judges out of business. We can put social workers out of business, right? Acts chapter 2:4, right? 2, 3, 4. Let's put social work out of business. Those are the sorts of things I think we can add to the conversation about in terms of protecting victims of crime from criminal deviance. Expand it to include more stakeholders and players.
Brother Dean.
This is awesome. This is awesome. So Bishop Hunt, I want to pivot back to you on this, because you were the president of a prison fellowship. A lot of data, Dr. Bradley talked about the data. A lot of data will demonstrate that the faith-based or Christian approach to this has better results than that does not have a faith aspect. talk to us a little bit about, because I remember when you were serving there, just your excitement that I saw in getting in front of prisoners to give them the gospel and to provide discipleship. And I would argue, because some people have put in the chat ideas about how do you change the mentality, but this biblical worldview, giving a new view of how they see themselves and how they see the world and how they see their neighbor. Talk to us a little bit about the successes that you saw in prison fellowship, where they use some of the principles and the approaches that Dr. Bradley has just talked about.
First of all, I appreciate what Dr. Bradley was just saying about marriage and on the front end. The front end is very, very important, and it's critical, and particularly as it relates to the Black community itself. I mean, when you start talking about 70 to 75% of all Black children are born out of wedlock, and they don't have a father in the home. So the reality of the situation is we have to preach responsibility to our young men, and our young men need to understand that their responsibility has to go not only just when they're on a job or in the street, but they also have to understand it in the home or in their relationship with women. But what has happened is that we have a whole fatherless generation. And so with that, this increases the percentage of those that are headed toward a crime and headed to a prison because of the lack of the father in the home. So it all is the same. It's all together. Whether you put it by marriage or fatherlessness or whatever the case is, how do we raise up these young men that most of them now, particularly in the Black community, don't have a father in the home, because the percentages are much higher for them to succeed if they do. But with prison fellowship, our focus was not as much on the front end as it was while they're in prison. And we had an opportunity to go and see a lot of different examples of what can be done that can help. And that, like you may have heard of the prison called Angola. Angola is in Louisiana. It's actually Louisiana State Prison. Well, one of the things about the warden there was that he was determined that it would not be the bloodiest prison in the world, which at some point it was considered the bloodiest prison, but transform that so that they can have literally houses of worship there on in the prison. And they literally started that, so they actually had pastors and elders in the church, in church functions within the prison, and just interacting. And then they also started rehabilitation, where they taught them the things about working on cars, carpentry, and all these actually giving them licenses, so when they come out, they'll be more equipped to succeed while they're there. So what I found is when you're able to give them some type of alternative while they're in prison for success, an alternative. We worked with a program called TUMI, and this is basically the Urban Ministry Initiative, where the whole idea was to teach them to become ministers in the urban community once they come out. We wanted them to go back to the community where they literally committed the crime, but they come back trained to preach, trained to transform other lives. So I'll give you a perfect example of a man that actually had a life sentence, and he's such a committed Christian now. This was he was in Michigan, actually. And one of the prisons, I won't give you the name because I don't want you to unveil, but this particular one was a God-fearing man, but he came home and he found his wife and a man in the bed together in his home. So he ended up shooting both of them. He killed them both. And as a result, so of course that's considered a crime of passion. But they gave him, of course, a life sentence because he also took 2 lives. Afterwards, he was tremendously broken, recognized that he committed this crime of passion. And so he began to change his life. And so while he was in prison, his whole life so changed that they started calling him preacher. And he went through this training that we would be offering, which is urban prison ministry, so that when he did opportunity, if he ever got the opportunity to come out, that he would come out trained to preach and trained to be a transformer. And that was the issue. Can you train them while they're in the prison that they can literally come out transformed? So one of the things I loved in prison fellowship, quite honestly, I came back to my own church and I told them, my greatest benefit is not preaching in front of you. I get more of a fulfillment preaching to a prison congregation, because these guys are on fire and they'll look right through you. If you're not legitimate, you're not authentic, they'll see that you're just sitting here with some kind of tradition and some religion. But if you come there with a true message, a message of change, I think that's why you had the Islam took such an impact with the prison, because they came to change people's lives. The church trailed in that. But if the church comes in with a bold form of rehabilitation where they say, you come to Christ, this is not only just jailhouse religion, which of course many people try to put it down, say it was just jailhouse religion. No, I'm saying if a man is totally changed, he's changed in terms of his attitude with maybe his relatives on the outside, he's changed in the inside. Even as I go back to Angola, these guys, if somebody acted up and did something wrong with the privileges that they were given, they could even dress, not necessarily in some cases, they would earn the right not even to necessarily dress in a prison uniform, but they were clearly leaders and elders there. If somebody acted up, they would deal with it first, because they said, no, you're not gonna hinder our privileges that we have. And they were given great privileges because they acted right while they're inside a prison. Rehabilitation can happen, and that's the transformative component. So preaching in the prison and working on discipleship and training while they're in prison. So Dr. Brad is absolutely right. If we can get on the front end and stop them from even getting in the cycle. But so many of our men, and I'm particularly in this case, I'm talking about Black men, because one out of 3 young men in their 20s are in prison. But 40%, we represent 13% of the population, but we present 40% of the prison population. And in some cases, it's worse than that. Worse than that, it's more like 60 and 70%. So the point I'm making is, if we can somehow transform them legitimately, that was one of the benefits I saw, is that while we were there, we went from all through, from California, to Louisiana, all the prisons around the nation, and tried to give them biblical worldview, understanding that the Bible speaks to every component of society, and you can transform. You do not have to stay like you are, but you can transform this prison. We even told them, and I'm going a little further, but I'm saying this was a passion for me. We even said, don't wait till you get out to exercise your Christianity. You transform your own prison right here, from cell to cell, relationship to relationship. So our challenge for them was to become a Christian while they inside those walls. And literally we would have what we used to call church within the walls. So within those prisons, get them on fire for God, so they will begin to exercise what they say they believe. Now, when they come out, it'll be legitimate. So yes, so prison, all these different components have so great importance. And I again agree, Dr. Bradley, but beforehand, while you're in and while you're out. But while you're in, it's critical. And we've ventured over to punitive results. That is our determinant. Longer sentences, war on crime, all these things, 3 strikes you're out, all those things just lend it to longer sentencing. But longer sentencing, in some cases, just make you a better criminal, because you can stay there too long and your life and your mentality becomes so criminalized that you come out and then you still maintain the same mentality that you went into. We have to transform them while they're in their prison. And that's going to be a major change, a transformation that has to happen from the church and from those organizations that specialize in working inside the prison walls.
So this is largely a male phenomena. We've talked about that this is, the disproportionate impact in the Black community. I'm going to talk to Bishop Hunt and to Dr. Bradley on this. What does it take for Black men, preachers? We have a number of them that are on here, to be more committed to transformation of men in their churches and in their communities, because a lot of preachers I know are more concerned about how many people they can get into a building and not how many men they can disciple or transform. Bishop talked about, I mean, I'll just use the example. I mean, I was blessed that I had a father, but when I got to college, I met somebody like yourself who was willing to confront me about my lifestyle and challenge me to how I should live my life. And similarly, Dr. Bradley, I know that you've done, recent research even just on, on men and young men and what it takes to see transformation. Jesus did it, right? He had, 12 disciples that followed him that he poured his life into. So, Bishop, what would you say, and then I'll go to Dr. Bradley, what would you say to preachers who are on this line, to men, to deacons, to elders? What would you say to them about their responsibility in this effort to make a difference in our culture?
Yeah. Well, we have to first model, and we have to be intentional. The young men in my church, they're many teenagers, and some have started. They came to the church. They're 5 or 8, and now I've watched them grow up, and they're taller than their parents, and to watch them in the process. But I'm sitting here knowing that they're being impacted by the culture. They're being impacted by their peers. So what we've had to do is we've had to make a very aggressive effort to have someone that can talk with them on their terms, but also for those of us that are engaged in the community, those of us that are older, to engage with them also so that we know that we care where they are. I mean, we just recently had a meeting in the church where we had the young men came up, and we literally prayed for each one of them and sowed into them with their parent beside them, particularly their father. It is very important to take very specific, intentional effort to come along these young men as they're coming through what probably is the most volatile time in their life, is they're going through high school, middle school. And even with, of course, we had an aggressive campaign with college students, but man, by the time they get into college, a lot of the writing's on the wall. So we have to be very, very intentional. And also, one of the things we also do is we try to let them know what it is to go to prison. We have one of the probably most radical prison ministers that I know right in our church, and he's constantly giving examples of what has happened when he goes to preach to these guys in prison. But prison is not easy. I mean, to understand prison from that perspective, they also need to know that there is a repercussion for doing things outside of God's will. So you want them to have understanding authority, understanding family, understanding what it is to obey God, and also to have some models around them that they can look up to. I specifically remember some of the people that were in my church. It was a Baptist church in Atlanta. I won't call the name of it, but it was some of the deacons that I wanted to respect them, but I saw them drinking and smoking and all this stuff outside the church. It was just, I couldn't understand, because I didn't see the lack of the sense of holiness and purity. But then there were some that spent time with us and worked us through some relational things that helped us to become an adult. So I went away to college. I still respected those men even as I went away to college. I'm saying we have to get them early on. If they're if you're a preacher or you're a pastor or you're a man of God on this line, please find some young man to adopt. Care about him, talk to his parents, work with them, offer them to go to a Braves game, a baseball game, or somewhere you can have some interaction. Sow into their life. Show them that you care about where they are, and then hopefully that's one more person that won't get into the system. That's the burden that I feel I have to carry from literally the pulpit, as well as my leadership and as the church.
That's awesome. Dr. Bradley, what should men on this line know about what you have discovered and researched about young men and what they can do to engage and to impact their lives?
This is a fantastic question. You know, one of the things that I pay attention to, particularly in Harlem, is I have to be careful about my sermon illustrations and applications. You can preach a whole series on Woman Thou Art Loose and build a massive church preaching to women. If all of your applications and all your sermons are about that man left you, that man did this, God's gonna bring you, right? If you are always preaching to women's issues, you might have a growing church, a massive ministry of women and their children and their mothers. And so I want to challenge preachers to preach as if men were there. If you want young men to be in your church, you have to apply the text to the world of young men. So your sermon illustrations and applications have to be about their world. If you just preach about the issues that women find themselves in, that's who will show up in the pews every single week. And we've got to stop saying on Father's Day, and the Lord blesses all the women doing double duty. They're not doing double duty, right? There just is no man. She is not playing the role of a father. She actually cannot do that. And so a lot of preachers, because they want to fill pews, start preaching to women only. And you can do that. You can preach to women only, and that's all that you will have. So a lot of bras get neglected because preachers don't even talk to them. That's one thing. If you're not preaching to a young man's world, he will not show up. Number two, a lot of preachers, as Bishop was saying, these young men don't respect. Right? Why don't they respect them? Well, look at them. They look sloppy. They're overweight, don't take care of themselves, don't look disciplined. They aren't the kind of men that these young men want to be like, right? A lot of them, there's a lot of corruption. They see them, like Bishop was saying, smoking, drinking, flirt with women, all that kind of mess. They don't want to be like that. So for a lot of them, they don't see their pastors as the kind of men they want to be like. And so what they do is they find men that they respect, that they want to be like. They find them on YouTube, they find them on Instagram, they find them on the streets, they find them in the game, because these are the brothers they respect. And then thirdly, I think the biggest mistake that churches make with respect to young men is realizing, or rather not realizing, that what a young man needs, I'd say between the ages of probably 12 and 25, he needs a guide. He needs a one-on-one mentor. And what we've been doing is throwing young men into youth ministry. We've been dumping them off into young adult ministry, and they're floating along. And what men need, they need a one-on-one guide. They need some individual person. A youth pastor can't do it. So one of the things I tell church leaders is this: if you have 15 young men in your youth group, you need 15 grown men in the youth group to mentor and disciple each one-on-one. And those are the sorts of things that churches have got to get back in the business of doing, instead of relying on that conveyor belt model where you throw them in ministries and just hope that things work out. No, an 18-year-old, a 22-year-old, a 25-year-old needs a man, either his father or another father figure, to meet with him one-on-one and disciple him. Now, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, they call this spiritual direction. Everybody has their own individual spiritual director. That is an ancient practice, thousands of year old practice. And American evangelicals and Protestants need to recover that tradition. So if we start preaching to men they will show up. If pastors become the sort of men that young men respect, and if we can get this one-on-one mentor and discipleship model to be embedded in how we do church, we'll have radically different results in terms of its impact on men, their ownership of their own communities, their commitment to marriage and commitment to their children, so they make different kinds of decisions and put the police out of business, and social workers, judges, and counselors.
Man, this is great. I want to give a shout out to Terry McCann, to Fern Taylor, some other guys, Dunama Sani, Washington. You guys have put some good conversations in the chat. I'm going to get better at this in terms of integrating everybody into this discussion, but this has been excellent tonight. I'm reminded, before I pass it over back to Pastor Eason to close us out, I'm reminded of Bishop Hunt, you and Bishop Boone mentioning this years ago, but of one of the revival movements, I believe Evans Roberts in, I want to say that was in Wales, where there was this revival movement that struck so profoundly that the police essentially started barbershop quartets because they had no longer any role to play, because everybody was now living a life of honesty, integrity, and virtue. And so they really had nothing else to do. And so that would be a great thing, that if in inner cities there were quartets that all started springing up all over because the police didn't have nothing else to do. Dr. Bradley, what you think?
I think we should think about that in terms of a goal. Let's put them all out of business by having robust communities of virtue and flourishing and thriving. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank all of you for this great discussion tonight. This will replay again, so you can visit the DLI Facebook page. We will be rebroadcasting this, and eventually all of these monthly Leaders Live calls will be on the website. I want to remind you all that if you enjoyed tonight, you will love attending the conference that's coming up. Our Faith, Our Family, Our Freedom. We'll have over 100 preachers who believe similar to what we're talking about tonight. You need to connect with some of them. We also will be blessed to have some fantastic African-American attorneys, doctors, but professional people and advocates that are gathered, one, to seek God, but also to receive from one another as to how we together can make a difference in our communities to the glory of God. Pastor Eason, I'll turn it over to you to close us out tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have been blessed tonight. Thank you, Dr. Bradley. Thank you, Bishop Hunt, for just the wisdom that you have shared with us this evening. And we're just excited about the information that you shared. And if I might just add this one thing, I have young men that come into my office, and older men, of course, as a pastor. And I just simply say to them the same thing. The Bible says, men sharpen men as iron sharpens iron. And I asked them, I said, who are you sharpening and who's sharpening you? And you have sharpened me tonight. So I really appreciate it. And I just want to look for more barbershop quartets in our neighborhoods. And so thank you all again for joining us. Please, as Bishop Nelson has mentioned, join us at our conference September 29th through October the 1st. The link is in the chat. And we thank you all. We know we went a little over tonight, but I think this information was certainly worth it. I hope everyone thinks it was worth your time. And we just thank you. Please join us again for our next Leaders Live next month. And we